Okay, I think we'll get started. So we've already talked a bit about the action potential, and we can kind of see where it might be arising from. So let's put some things together in that regard, and then we'll talk about something called the patch clamp, which is a incredible technology that helps us dig into what's really going on with the ion channels in the action potential. Okay, so if we think about the components of the action potential, the neuron is sitting there at rest, and in that state, it's dominated by the leak channels for potassium. There's some degree of leak for all the ions, but dominated primarily by the potassium, a little bit by the chloride, and the Goldman-Hodgkin's Katz equation that we talked about last time allows us to calculate to a pretty good approximation the rest potential if we just consider the potassium and its permeability for the leak channel. So that tends to be about -70 to -90 depending on the particular excitable cell. Now there's a threshold still negative, roughly around -60 to -50 millivolts, that if the voltage rises or depolarizes, becomes less negative, and crosses that threshold, that's when the sodium channels start to open up. They open up pretty rapidly compared to the potassium channels, which take a while to open up. So there's a period of time when the sodium channels are open, and there is a lot more conductivity of the sodium through the sodium channels. And remember, that's going in the opposite direction. Same charge, but opposite direction. So our voltage has swung now in the opposite direction. And so we'll spike up to about +50 to +60, which is the Nernst potential for a typical sodium. Now, the ion channels, the sodium ion channels, voltage-gated channels, then have this mechanism where they don't close again because we're above threshold, they're open, but they become blocked by another mechanism. And when we get to the proteins of these, the individual proteins of the sodium channel, we'll be able to see where all that comes from, the voltage detection, the opening, all that. But just for now, we know that that closes again then, which then diminishes the conductivity of the sodium. Meanwhile, the potassium voltage-gated channels are opening up. So we get this really strong conductivity of potassium now, which then slams the voltage back down and actually goes a little bit below, or hyperpolarizes below the rest state. Now, let's think about well, okay, let's keep going then. So we're under hyperpolarization. Then now, because we're below the threshold, things go back to normal eventually. The little ball block comes out of the sodium channel, but then it's positioned such that it's blocking, and then the potassium channels close. And so we're back to the original state where the voltage is dominated by the leak channels of the potassium. Okay, so let's trace that through time. Here's time here, here's voltage here. Here we're at rest. So this whole thing is considered the action potential. We're at rest. We now have this strong, we begin to depolarize for some reason, and we hit threshold. And then we have this massive spike because the sodium channels now are fully open. So during this period, our sodium channels are opening up rather quickly. But then they're beginning to get blocked, right? And so because of that, the sodium no longer dominates that Goldman-Hodgkin-Katz equation. So we drop down now, and in the meanwhile, the potassium channels are opening up. So we drop into this period called the refractory period, where we're actually below the rest potential. Now there's a early part of that refractory period, which is the absolute refractory period. This is the situation where the sodium channels are still blocked. So if we were to depolarize again, they would open, but they're still blocked. So we wouldn't get a spike. So you can't get arbitrarily close after a spike to another spike. So the refractory period determines this period. And in the most extreme case, it's the absolute refractory period. This would be about here, where the sodium channels are still open but blocked. Then they're closing and unblocking. If that happens, then you could force another action potential, even though we're starting at a hyperpolarized position here. So if we were to get a train, or a burst as it's called, then the maximum burst frequency would be determined by that refractory period. So it'd be 1 over the refractory period would be the absolute limit for a particular neuron. Okay, so again, we're going to kind of keep coming back through the different pieces. This is the broad picture here. Next time we're going to see a famous numerical expression for the action potential, the Hodgkin-Huxley potential. And then when we come into the individual proteins, we'll see the individual voltage-gated channels. Now, I want to talk about the patch clamp, which was developed in the mid-1970s by Nair and Sackman. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, and I want to get to the point that we're emphasizing for our needs here. But the basic idea, and this is amazing we can do this, is that we can measure one or a very small number of ion channels. So we can watch an ion channel individually open and close. And so mainly what I want to do is just outline how that's done. I'm no expert in it at all. And then I want to talk about the data, and that's what we really want to worry about. So the basic idea is that we have a pipette. And it turns out if you suction that pipette, lightly suction that pipette onto a cell, it forms a very high resistive seal from outside to inside. Then you can put a different type of, you could put an electrode inside the pipette and then one outside the pipette, and you can measure that difference. So the pipette can be made small enough that it just encompasses a part of the membrane that has, one or maybe just a few ion channels. So in our minds, let's take the best case where we've hit a patch where it just has one ion channel. Okay. The most direct way is just put this on the cell, right? And this is called on cell. And then you can put this in a beaker of something. Maybe you put a neurotoxin in there. Maybe you put some different type of drug in there, and you can measure then the activity. You can measure the current going through these channels. Okay. Now, what's really cool is that you can, if you have it well suctioned and then you mechanically pull it apart, you can pull off a small patch of that membrane. And so you don't worry about the rest of the cell, and you're able to present the inside of that membrane directly to the contents of the beaker. So the beaker's out here. So imagine we're kind of testing a drug and we're wondering, oh, does the drug bind somewhere else on the cell, and then through some internal biochemical pathways we get the channels to open or close or whatever. We change the conductivity of those the openings and closings of those channels. Or must the drug bind directly to the channel itself on the inside of the cell? So this kind of experiment would allow you to sort of parse that apart. If you get activity here, you don't know yet, is the drug itself just ending up on the outside and some internal process is happening, or is the drug actually getting in to here? So let's say it's the drug here, binds here and some internal stuff happens. If you now run this experiment and just face the drug, there's no place for that drug to bind, there's no internal structure happening, and so you would see just baseline here, whereas here you would see activity to that drug. So it allows you to determine a mechanism of action a little bit better. Other ways you can do that is you can apply a greater suction until this ruptures, and now notice that the inside of your pipette over here is in contact with the outside of the cell. Here the inside of your pipette is contact with the inside of your cell, and it's the whole cell. So this is called the whole cell configuration. And then interestingly, you could mechanically pull that off, and then the things kind of seal up and you get an outside out. I'm amazed this works, but this is one of the configurations as well. So here you're presenting the inside of the cell to the beaker. Here you're presenting the outside of the cell to the beaker right in that local region. Here you're presenting the whole cell to the beaker and you're measuring from the outside. Here you're presenting the whole cell to the beaker and you're measuring from the inside. Okay. So if you're interested in this, I'd encourage you to look up the history of it and how it's all done. I give a little bit of a circuit diagram and some mathematical calculations in the notes, but I don't go too far with that. So we're not going to talk much more about this, but what we want to pull out of this is that we do have a way to measure individual ion channels. And they behave very different than the collective in terms of what we see. So let's get ourselves really oriented here. I'm going to take some time with this. So let's say this would be a patch clamp experiment, and this is what we would see. And for now, just look at the black line. This is time. This is the time axis. So time goes this way. The blue here, this is going to be a sodium channel, and the voltage will go up. That's why it's going up. And the pink will be an potassium channel. Voltage will go down. Now, sometimes in these experiments, they'll just put everything up, and you just have to orient yourself. And sometimes they'll have it down. So here is a whole collection of these. We call this the ensemble. That would be what we measure on the macro scale, like what is happening overall on the cell. We see the sodium channels opening up and closing. So the signal rises because we have more and more and more and more channels opening. Then the signal drops because we have more and more and more and more being blocked. And so we get this kind of ensemble time dynamic. And here we get the slow turn on of the potassium channel until they're all turned on. So it's a continuous process as more and more channels join the fight there. But if we were looking at an individual channel, it's either open or it's closed. So it's much more digital in that regard. So there's always some kind of random open or close. So I kind of indicated that here. Just so happened that before this dash line, we have not applied a depolarization voltage. So right here, we apply a depolarization to get it above threshold. There's going to be some random spurious opening, closing all the time. And in fact, that can be physiologically important, but mainly we're focused on what happens when we hit this threshold. So now we see that same channel opening, spending much more time open. Right? It's still closing sporadically. Open, open, close, open, and so on. And then it closes, a little blip here, and then it's just closed. So here is where it has opened. Here is where the ball has come in. The next one, this is a different channel, has a different dynamic, but still roughly the same. It's on during this early period and then off again. So here is where we're seeing the channel open, but the ball is not in place blocking, and now the ball blocks over here. And we can see that for here and here and here. And so what is this blue curve? That is just if you were to add all of these up. We see we get a lot of activity in here, and that gives us our spike, and then very little activity before and after, so that's our rest state. So the ensemble is a additive collection of all of the cell's activity, and now with the patch clamp, we're actually able to measure one of these cells. if we look at the pink here, so we hit threshold, but it doesn't really turn on right away. Maybe there's a spike, maybe there isn't. And then as we go, it turns on, and here it's turned on for a long time. So there'll be long stretches where it's on, maybe an off dip, and then on again. And so if we add up the pinks, we're not going to get much early on, and then we will, as the whole ensemble, hundreds of thousands of these turn on, we get this smooth looking curve. So we have to think of the macroscopic physiological, electrophysiology experiments as representing a collective population. So they feel like they're continuous. The action potential looks continuous and so on. But they're actually made up of these digital components where the individual channels are open or closed. Okay, so that's it for this aspect of the action potential. This doesn't mean we have learned it all, certainly, but what I would like you to do now is just try to tell yourself the story of this with a blank sheet of paper and see if it makes sense to you based on what we've talked about so far, how we can get this large swing of voltage. It's called an action potential because it's active, or it's not this sort of slow, passive electrical signal moving on. Once it hit threshold, something fundamentally changes. The ion channels that were closed are now open. So there's this active component of the action potential, which allows it to have this dramatic spike. It's what are called a highly nonlinear process. So we'll dig into a mathematical model for that next time, and then we'll dig into the proteins and molecular structure that make all this happen as we move forward.